Hey y'all, I'm Shayna Cersei and I am so excited to paint with you today. So today we are going to be doing another page in our watercolor journals, and if you're new here, we paint in our watercolor journals as often as we can. We try not to be too fearful of anything. This is a place just for us to play, experiment, have fun, try new things, and learn. And learning can be messy sometimes. But today I really wanted to we're in the spooky season. Halloween is almost here. And I wanted to do a witch's hat, but not like a costumey Halloween witch's hat, but one with, so I sketched it out on a piece of paper first, but I wanted to do like a witch's hat, but with like florals on it. So this is a very kind of open sketch of what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to try to recreate this in my book and then go from there. So let's get to it. So I have 140-pound cold press paper in my 6x9 watercolor sketchbook. This is 100% cotton paper that I use, and Bao Hong is the brand. If you want to get links to any of the supplies and materials that I use to learn more about them, you can find those in the description. I use Core, Q-O-R, by Golden watercolor paints. This is my large palette of 24 colors. I also have a small Core mini palette. This palette I made myself from a blank palette, so got the metal part with the pans in it completely empty, and then bought tube paints to add to that. This Core mini palette came with the pans, these little half pans already made for me. So these are great. These are super vibrant and super saturated. I love Core. You don't have to love Core. You can definitely use whatever brand you love and enjoy. All right. In addition to that, I have a couple of brushes. I stick with rounds almost 100% of the time. I have a size 10 and a size 4 right now. I have a size 6 wandering around here, as well as a whole thing of brushes that I might dip into, but most likely I'll just stick with these. Okay, so let's get started. I have a mechanical pencil. This is a cheapie from, it's a number 2 pencil, so you don't have to get fancy. I do have kneaded erasers around here. Highly recommend a kneaded eraser. You can use the eraser on the back of your pencil, but if you're doing a lot of erasing on your watercolor paper, can damage it. So kneaded erasers you can get for like $1 or less at your local art store, or you could certainly order them online. They're just these gray gummy things, and they are much more gentle to your surface of your paper. They pick up the graphite versus rubbing it away. Okay, let's get started. So my witch's hat. There's no real super wrong way to do this, but if you want to get something similar to this, I'm going to kind of walk you through. And it's going to start with some basic shapes, and then we add all of the details like the folds and things like that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of figure out where the base of my hat is going to be. So this is the widest, maybe a little wider, the widest part of the bottom. So I'm going to make a slightly rounded. That's this part actually under here, not the brim. The brim, oh, maybe I'm going too wide because I do need the brim to be significantly wider. Okay. So you see, I just used the back of my pencil, but I was gentle. So let's go a little bit narrower. All right, so this is the base, and then we're going to make a rounded, or kind of looks like a candy corn. Yeah, a candy corn. All right. Or a blunted off triangle. So it doesn't come to a point at the top because we have to make the curve. So then after this, off of this, we're going to put the curve of our hat. Now it doesn't look spectacular yet, but don't worry. We'll get into all that. The brim of the hat, let's go from behind. We're going to go straight out. And the brims of these hats can be kind of funky. We're going to come up this way, rounded. So here we're going to see a bit of a bend in the brim is what I'm trying to accomplish here. So let's make that more apparent. So as this comes up this way, we're going to round this off a little bit more. And I'm going to round that off up there, get rid of this point. All right, so we have a nice little funky brim of a hat. I'm going to cover a lot of this up. And what I'm noticing is this is a little short for me. I want this to be a little taller. I was afraid I wasn't going to get the proportions right. So again, this is why we practice in our sketchbooks. If I were doing this as like a full final piece, I would definitely draw it out on just regular paper first, and then I would trace it. So that way I wasn't messing with my watercolor paper. So I'm just bringing up the height of our little candy corn here a little bit higher. And then you see a little bump at the top. There we go. Actually, I'm going to bring this down at that angle a little bit further. Beautiful. All right, so now that we have the basic shape, we can draw in from the top down. I'm going to draw in some places along the edges where it's going to be kind of folded and wrinkled. Along the top where it bends, it definitely is going to have some wrinkles in it, and along the bottom. If you've ever done any of my gnome videos, it's very similar. And we'll do a few this way. And we're changing kind of the outside shape of it too. You see how I made it more curved versus a straight line? And then you can definitely lighten up all of your pencil lines before you start to paint. But what I want to do is, because we can't just paint this whole hat in and then put flowers on top of it, because watercolor is, say it with me, transparent. So everything that we put on top of something else, we're going to see through it to some degree, and it's going to interact with the paint below it. So we're going to have to kind of block out the areas. So that's why I like to draw the whole hat. And then we're going to draw the flowers right on top of these lines. So I'm going to do, and I'm just going to kind of block out shapes where flowers are going to be. There's going to be a flower there. I'm going to do a bigger one in the middle. You don't even have to draw like the whole shape of the flower, just kind of where it's going to be so we can paint around it a bit. From here, I am going to draw this. I'm not too worried about. I'm going to put some leaves over here. And again, you can change things up. We're going to do some sprigs of leaves over here, just to give yourself kind of a little roadmap. But it doesn't mean you're, I want to do something kind of on this edge facing to the side, I think, which I don't necessarily have to pencil in because nothing is behind it, but just for composition's sake. Yeah, okay. So now we can erase everything inside these circles. So you can start to see, we just need to kind of leave this space somewhat blank or very lightly painted around it, so that we can put flowers in there that are not interrupted by the dark brown or black of the hat itself. Make sense? Okay, so let's lighten up all these lines. Let's get to painting our beautiful little witch's hat. I'm not worried about the lines really too much in the top. I think I'm going to make it pretty dark, with the exception of the highlights. But it's always helpful to lighten them. Okay, taking out my round number 10, we're going to start with our biggest swaths of areas. So a couple of things I want to keep in mind. This brim overall has to be slightly lighter on top than it does on the bottom, so we can see the change. When I do my wrinkles, the part that is raised, so this part is puffing out, is going to be slightly lighter here than in the crease. The crease will be darker, so keeping that in mind as we build layers on. All right, so I think I want it to be like a dark brown, like chocolatey velvet color. I am going to pick up, you know what, let's do some color mixing. So I already have this kind of brownish color here, but how I got this was on the last painting I did. I used orange. So I have a transparent Pyrrol orange, whatever orange you have, and I used Ultramarine to get this beautiful dark brown color. And I love these two colors together because Ultramarine separates a little bit as it dries because it's a granulating color and it's a heavier mineral, and it creates variation enough that it just looks interesting. It still translates as brown, but if you look closely, you can see where it separates a little bit, which is very cool. All right, I have to take a sip of my coffee. I'm so sorry. It is early in the morning here, and the beautiful sun is out. All right, so I'm going to do basically, I'm going to paint my creases and the edges here. I'm going to try to keep everything really wet for this first layer. And then I'm going to take my brush, get it wet. We're just kind of setting ourselves up for painting multiple layers on these creases. This is layer one. We're definitely going to come in here with more darker, pulling out color. All right, so we have kind of the base layer. While this is still wet, I'm going to come back into these creases. But then also take a damp but clean brush and you can lift out color towards the top. The more stark it is, the more, the more contrast there is. Like the brighter I make this and the darker I make that will make it look more puffy. If that makes sense. This is going to be super dark down here. All right, layer one. Let's go to the brim of the hat. The brim is going to be pretty much a flat color. There can definitely be some variation as it like folds. But again, we want the top of the brim and maybe the edge will be slightly darker. Not a true outline. You want it to be a soft gradient as it finds its way in. And I'll show you in a second after I get this. But this bottom part here, we're going to make a little darker where it folds under. All right, let's make some more of this brown, orange, ultramarine. Beautiful brown. So like if I make this edge a little darker, like I don't want it to stay outlined like that. I'm going to rinse my brush off. Now it's just a little damp. And this is easier to do when things are still damp, so wet on damp. And then you get kind of a variegated edge there. maybe this part up here as it curves away and is under the flowers. You can always come back and add some shadows later, but all right, so now I'm going to add a little Payne's gray to my brown. Make a little more brown. And this is darker. I do want that to be dry so they don't run into each other, but of course I'm too impatient. That would be silly. I'm leaving the tiniest white line. It would just be easier if they were both dry, or if the top was dry. And I will fill in that tiny, tiny sliver of a white line very soon. All right, with this darker color though, I'm loving this richness of it. I probably will apply some, I'm gonna apply some of this up here to just bring back down the overall tone. So this is layer 2. Blend it out. Definitely along this side. See, I'm not applying it as thickly up here, so it's not as dark, but now I am going to put kind of a dark bend in here on the underside. So whenever I do that, I'm just pulling water out. It just means I have too much material or water in my brush. So now I definitely have to apply some of it up here because we need the hat to be all somewhat the same color. I love the rich tone with this. So this would be considered a glaze where we're putting a thin layer of another color on top of an already existing color to kind of change the overall tone or build up opacity. See, still lighter, but we can always go back and make this darker as well with another layer. Okay, so I'm gonna let this dry and then I'll probably come in and zhuzh up some of these wrinkles just a little bit after it's dry. I'm sure it's gonna flatten a bit. And then we're gonna start on our flowers. All right, let it dry. All right, we're back. So I love how this is looking. I'm definitely going to add a little bit more contrast to it in detail, but I'm going to do our flowers first. So let's get started with those. I'm very excited. I'm going to just clean out my yellow section here. So the flowers, I want these to be like dried, kind of that fall dried flower color. We're going to do muted colors, desaturated colors. I'm going to start with magenta. So we're going to do like maroon-ish colors or dusty rose colors, purples, greens, but like gray greens, if that makes sense. So we're going to start with magenta. The opposite of magenta on the color wheel is green. I'm going to add some green to this. So we're going to get this dustier, more muted color. And I'm going to actually add a little green and a little ultramarine. Beautiful color. So this kind of dusty rose purple color. All right, so for my flowers, I'm going to start here. I'm going to just do big petaled flowers, leaving the center open. And we're going to add a couple layers onto this as well in the center. So it's going to look messy right now. Actually, this one I'm going to... Okay. That's our center flower. It looks like a big blob. I dropped a big dollop of water right there. So I'm definitely going to darken this a little bit. And now my other flowers, I think I want them, should I do a yellow, like a dusty rose one? Or, I think I'm going to do purple. So I picked out some Diarylide purple. I just mixed it into this dusty rose panel here. I think I'm actually going to add some more blue to it. So similar here. Paint some petals around. We'll get to more details later, putting in the centers. Okay, so we have three kind of edges of flowers. I'm also going to do a yellow. Am I going to do a yellow? No, I'm not going to do a yellow. I will decide what I'm going to add on here later, if I'm going to add anything. So while those dry, and they look like they're hot mess selves, that's okay. I'm going to make some beautiful green. So I'm going to start with my sap green. Ultramarine is like the color of the hour. I'm going to add ultramarine to it, which is going to give us this grayer, kind of duskier blue-green color. And if I wanted to desaturate it more, I could pull in a little bit of the magenta or purple. Purple has magenta in it. All right. I'm going to pick up my smaller brush, and I am going to start to put in some leaves. Right here. Some of it is just going to be like some sprigs coming off the hat. I'm going to go right in front of the hat like this, like so. Again, they're going to be darker in appearance where it overlaps. All right, lovely, lovely. Let's get into, I'm going to go into the center of these flowers with Payne's Gray. I'm going to paint in a little center like so. Now I'm going to come back to my purple, magenta, little ultramarine. I'm going to put more layers on this. But I want some of that lighter layer to shine through. We're working pretty small here, so you do have to be careful of your space. I kind of lost the individual flowers in here. Or the petals, the individual petals. On this one, I'll go back in. I'm going to pull some color out. I'll go back in and add some details in a minute. All right, let's get back to our magenta color. Magenta and a little green. Ooh, it's like a really dark. So I'm basically just outlining kind of where the petals would be, adding a little texture. Now I'm going to come back in with just a damp brush. Soften up those edges. Don't worry, we're going to connect this center in a moment. I'm going to take some of the same color, this darker magenta color. I'm going to just use it on this purple flower. So I think I definitely, if I did this again, which I might, because this is super fun, but I might draw out the shape of the flowers even a little bit more definitively when I'm in my drawing phase and make the edges a little more defined rather than just circles, but I think it's working out okay. All right, so there are flowers. Let that dry for a second. We're going to come back to our greens. I'm going to add, now that these are dry, I'm going to add some darker color into some of them. Another layer, if you will, over some of this green that goes over the hat. Adding some different shapes. All right, so we're going to go back in. I'm going to come under the flowers and make some darker colors under here with the brown to really lift and separate. But I'm going to let everything dry first before we get into the next round. All right, so things are pretty dry. Let's switch out this paper towel. It's pretty saturated. Doesn't mean I throw it away. Just let it dry and use it again. All right. So now I'm going to come back to my brown. Let me make some more of that rich brown color. And I did, what did I do before? Orange and ultramarine. Orange and ultramarine. And a little Payne's gray. Don't be mad at me for muddying up my colors. It's okay. They will be revived. All right, so we have some nice dark brown. So I'm going to come under here. Basically just creating a shadow under there. It's a little, I see that it has a little bit of a glare on it for you. So as it dries, you'll see. I am blending it out. I don't want it to have a hard edge. I'm also going to add another layer or edge to the brim here and blend that out that way. But right up close under the shadow, I can even take a little Payne's gray and kind of go, now that it's still wet, I'm going to go right up under there. And even over here, I'm going to put a little shadow on the hat that these leaves are leaving on the surface. Beautiful. All right, I'm going to take some of this really dark, even Payne's gray, dark brown, and define this edge here. So we get the tipping up of that brim. So you can start to see now that this is drying, that nice shadow underneath that helps separate those flowers. For the flower centers, you can see I'm making a mess down here. I'm going to now put some dark little dots around the edge here on all of them. We are going to connect them. I'm going to use, just gives it more texture in there. I'm going to use a rigger or a script liner. Sorry for my arm in the way. So I'm going to take my script liner and make a few connections. I'm not going to worry about being exact or perfect. But just making sure they kind of radiate out from the center. Boop, 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 boop. And also with that beautiful green and ultramarine, you can even go in and make a few more, especially right here. I want it to be really dark. And we could even do, let's see. I'll put some really dark leaves. Small ones, but little And you know what? I think I'm going to introduce a little bleed proof white to this overall in just a few spots, just to pump up some contrast and some highlights in some areas. I think that'll be really fun. So over here too, if we do some smaller, super dark leaves, contrast is always your friend. So you can see that we've built in some really dark areas that help those middle tones. The whole hat is kind of a middle tone. So we need some really dark areas. And I think adding a few, in addition to these little white spots that we left, a few little white highlights will really make things pop. Okay, now I'm going to come back up here into the hat with this really dark brown color. And I'm going to add in some kind of finer wrinkles into the top. But blending them in. Same thing here. So again, just adding a little bit more contrast. I don't know how long this video has been so far. I feel like forever, but I'm enjoying like every second of it. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little worried in the beginning that I wasn't gonna be able to pull off something satisfying on camera, because this is the first time I've painted this particular subject. I mean, components of a subject like this for sure, but my flowers made me very nervous, but they came together. But I'm trying to remember what I preach, which is, this is practice. It's okay if it falls apart. Keep going, keep learning. Because for every mistake you make, you learn what not to do next time. These I really want such a small space, but I want it to be a little more textured. I guess it looks okay. Come down the back side here a little bit. All right, I think we're close to done. Oh yes, I was going to add some bleed proof white. Let's do that because I think it'll add just another element of super fun. But I'm really happy how this kind of all came out like this. Let's, if I can find it, usually it's sitting, oh, here it is. Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. I am not sponsored by them, but might as well be because I love this stuff. All right. This is very similar to, so this is not white watercolor. White watercolor is going to be very transparent, is not going to leave, it's going to make things like more gray or pastel or opaque, but it's not going to cover up anything like this stuff can. So this is a very opaque. Did I say white watercolor is going to be opaque? It's going to be transparent. Sorry. This is very opaque. It can go on top of watercolor, but it dries matte like a watercolor versus an acrylic, which would dry a little more glossy. Doesn't mean you can't use it. Similar to a gouache, but not quite a gouache. All right, so I just took some of it. I watered it down slightly just to get it to flow. I loaded up my script liner here. So I'm going to add, I think I'm just going to add some white dots into the center of my flowers. Like that. It's going to give a little pop there. Maybe a highlight or two. I think that'll be too crazy there. So then in the leaf bunches, I think I'm going to put some like white little sprays over top. So I'm just kind of dabbing these in, and then I'm going to connect them with this dark green. And you don't even have to do things that make sense. You could just splatter in or dot in a few dots for fun, or put some highlights on your leaves. So we could just go back through and add some white highlights. And we could even add white leaves if we wanted to over top of a few things that go over the hat. You can't put white over the white of the paper, but there we go. And if that's too much, for you, we can always go back, let that dry. And it will mix with watercolor, kind of. So if I put watercolor over top of it and like mix them together, they will mix together. All right, I think I'm just about done. I just want this little section right here. I need a dark leaf over top. There we go. All right, I think we're done. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for painting with me this lovely little witch's hat. Go ahead and check out the description for links to supplies and materials. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you, and also share with a friend who you think might also enjoy this watercolor journey. All right, y'all, take care. Happy painting.